Hello and good day. Our topic for today is still cost volume profit analysis or CVP analysis. This is the second part of the discussion in CVP analysis, and in this video, I'm going to discuss the multi-product break-even analysis. Multi-product break-even analysis. Multi-product break-even analysis is used when a company produces and sells two or more products. In our previous topic, which is single product break-even analysis, that is used when a company produces and sells only one product. Just like in single product break-even analysis, dito sa multi-product break-even analysis, we are going to compute for the following. First, the break-even point in pesos, and second, the break-even point in units. Let's start with break-even point in pesos. Sa single product break-even analysis, ang break-even point in pesos ay fixed costs divided by contribution margin ratio. That is FC divided by CMR. Sa multi-product break-even analysis, ganun din, except that the denominator is WACMR or weighted average contribution margin ratio. So, kukunin natin yung weighted average ng CMR for each product. Next is break-even point in units. Sa single product break-even analysis, ang break-even point in units ay fixed costs divided by contribution margin per unit. FC divided by CM per U. Sa multi-product break-even analysis, ganun din, except that the denominator is WACM per U or weighted average contribution margin per unit. So, kukunin natin yung weighted average ng contribution margin per unit for each product. Let us now apply the formulas by answering a problem. ABC Company sells products A, B, and C. Data about the three products are as follows. Given ang selling price per unit, variable cost per unit, contribution margin per unit, sales in units, total sales in units, and the total fixed costs. Requirements. Requirement number 1, determine the break-even point in pesos. And requirement number 2, determine the break-even point in units. Before we answer requirement number 1, i-compute muna natin yung sales in pesos for each product. Para ma-compute yung sales in pesos, imumultiply natin yung selling price per unit sa sales in units. So, for product A, 100 pesos times 1,000 units. That is equal to 100,000 pesos. For product B, 120 pesos times 2,000 units. That is equal to 240,000 pesos. And for product C, 50 pesos times 5,000 units. That is equal to 250,000 pesos. So all in all, the total sales in pesos is 590,000 pesos. Requirement number 1 is determine the break-even point in pesos. Ang formula ay break-even point in pesos is equal to fixed costs divided by weighted average contribution margin ratio. Since given na sa problem yung fixed costs, ang problema na lang ay yung weighted average contribution margin ratio. Kukunin natin yung weighted average ng contribution margin ratio. To do this, kailangan nating i-multiply yung contribution margin ratio for each product sa sales mix. Ano ba yung sales mix? Sales mix is the relative combination of quantities of sales of various products that make up the total sales of a company. For purposes of computing the weighted average contribution margin ratio, the sales mix is determined using the sales in pesos. So kapag ang hinahanap ay weighted average contribution margin ratio, palagi kayong magbe-base sa sales in pesos. As I said earlier, para makompute yung weighted average contribution margin ratio, imumultiply natin yung contribution margin ratio for each product sa sales mix. One of the ways to compute the contribution margin ratio is contribution margin per unit divided by selling price per unit. So for product A, ang contribution margin per unit ay 40 pesos. Ang selling price per unit ay 100 pesos. 40 pesos divided by 100 pesos, that is equal to 40%. Sa product B naman, ang contribution margin per unit ay 30 pesos. Ang selling price per unit ay 120 pesos. 30 pesos divided by 120 pesos, that is equal to 25%. Sa product C naman, ang contribution margin per unit ay 10 pesos. At ang selling price per unit ay 50 pesos. 10 pesos divided by 50 pesos, that is equal to 20%. Next, sales mix. In order to compute for the sales mix, get the sales in pesos for each product and divide it by the total sales in pesos. So sales in pesos for each product divided by the total sales in pesos. For product A, ang sales in pesos ay 100,000 pesos. Ang total sales in pesos ay 590,000 pesos. 100,000 pesos divided by 590,000 pesos, that is equal to 16.95%. For product B, 240,000 pesos divided by 590,000 pesos. That is equal to 40.68%. For product C, 250,000 pesos divided by 590,000 pesos. That is equal to 42.37%. Next, i-multiply natin yung CMR sa sales mix. 40% times 16.95%, that is equal to 6.78%. 25% times 40.68%, that is equal to 10.17%. 20% times 42.37%, that is equal to 8.47%. I-add lang natin yung tatlo at yan na yung weighted average contribution margin ratio. 6.78% plus 10.17% plus 8.47%, that is equal to 25.42%. At this point, we can now compute for the break-even point in pesos. Break-even point in pesos is equal to fixed costs divided by weighted average contribution margin ratio. Ang fixed costs ay 101,680 pesos at ang weighted average contribution margin ratio ay 25.42%. 101,680 pesos divided by 25.42%, that is equal to 400,000 pesos. So our answer in requirement number 1 is 400,000 pesos. Ang break-even point in pesos ay 400,000 pesos. Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng 400,000 pesos na break-even point in pesos? Ang ibig sabihin niyan ay dapat magkaroon ng sales na 400,000 pesos si ABC Company to break even. Kapag ang sales niya ay 400,000 pesos, that means wala siyang net income and at the same time, wala din siyang loss. Recall that at break-even point, there is no profit and there is no loss. Ang tanong, dyan sa 400,000 pesos, ilan dapat ang sales sa product A to break even? Ilan dapat ang sales sa product B to break even? At ilan dapat ang sales sa product C to break even? Para malaman ang mga yan, imumultiply lang natin yung 400,000 pesos sa sales mix for each product. So for product A, 400,000 pesos times 16.95%. 400,000 pesos times 16.95%, that is equal to 67,800 pesos. That means dapat ang sales sa product A ay 67,800 pesos to break even. For product B, 400,000 pesos times 40.68%. That is equal to 162,720 pesos. That means dapat ang sales sa product B ay 162,720 pesos to break even. For product C, 400,000 pesos times 42.37%. That is equal to 169,480 pesos. That means dapat ang sales sa product C ay 169,480 pesos to break even. Next, requirement number 2. Determine the break-even point in units. Ang formula ng break-even point in units ay fixed costs divided by weighted average contribution margin per unit. Since given na yung fixed costs, ang problema na lang ay yung computation ng weighted average contribution margin per unit. Kukunin natin yung weighted average ng contribution margin per unit. To do this, kailangan nating i-multiply yung contribution margin per unit for each product sa sales mix. For purposes of computing the weighted average contribution margin per unit, the sales mix is determined using the sales in units. So kapag ang hinahanap ay weighted average contribution margin per unit, mag-base kayo sa sales in units. Yung contribution margin per unit, given na yan sa problem. 40 pesos for product A, 30 pesos for product B, and 10 pesos for product C. In order to compute for the sales mix, get the sales in units for each product and divide it by the total sales in units. For product A, ang sales in units ay 1,000 units. At ang total sales in units ay 8,000 units. 1,000 units divided by 8,000 units, that is equal to 12.5%. For product B, 2,000 units divided by 8,000 units, that is equal to 25%. For product C, 5,000 units divided by 8,000 units, that is equal to 62.5%. Next, imumultiply natin yung CM per unit sa sales mix. 40 pesos times 12.5%, that is equal to 5 pesos. 30 pesos times 25%, that is equal to 7.5 pesos. 10 pesos times 62.5%, that is 6.25 pesos. I-add lang natin yung tatlo at yan na yung weighted average contribution margin per unit. 5 pesos plus 7.5 pesos plus 6.25 pesos, that is equal to 18.75 pesos. At this point, we can now compute for the break-even point in units. Break-even point in units is equal to fixed costs divided by weighted average contribution margin per unit. Ang fixed costs ay 101,680 pesos. At ang weighted average contribution margin per unit ay 18.75 pesos. 101,680 pesos divided by 18.75 pesos, that is equal to 5,422.93 units. Since units ang pinag-uusapan dito, it is better kung i-round off nyo na sa whole number. That is 5,423 units. And that is the answer in requirement number 2, 5,423 units. Ang break-even point in units ay 5,423 units. Ang ibig sabihin nito, dapat makapagbenta si ABC Company ng 5,423 units to break even. Para malaman kung ilang units ng product A, B, at C ang dapat na mabenta, ibumultiply lang natin yung 5,423 units sa sales mix ng bawat product. So for product A, 5,423 units times 12.5%. 5,423 units times 12.5%, that is equal to 678 units. 678 units ng product A ang dapat na mabenta to break even. For product B, 5,423 units times 25%. That is equal to 1,356 units. 1,356 units ng product B ang dapat na mabenta to break even. And for product C, 5,423 units times 62.5%. That is equal to 3,389 units. 3,389 units ng product C ang dapat na mabenta to break even.